This is the next workshop in the 2025 New York State World Languages Professional Learning Series. My name is Candace Black, and I am your World Language Associate in the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages of the New York State Education Department. Welcome to Do I Still Teach Grammar? Yes, Situating Grammar in Proficiency-Based Instruction. The internal question for many teachers transitioning to proficiency-based instruction is, do I still teach grammar? In the proficiency-oriented classroom, grammar structures continue to play an important role. That role, however, is in support of specific language functions aligned to performance indicators for each learning standard. In this session, the presenters will share several approaches for developing students' increasing levels of control of grammatical structures. These strategies will be embedded within the frame of communicatively and culturally contextualized lesson sequences. Participants will learn how to build their grammar toolbox for instruction at checkpoints A and B. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to invite Dr. Joanne O'Toole, Bill Heller, and Dr. Lori Langer de Ramirez to begin this webinar.
Thank you, Candy. This is Joanne O'Toole, and I'm going to get us started. And I want to warn everyone, this is a very robust presentation. I also need you to know we've turned off the chat because we really do need the focus until the end of our session when we will take your questions. So let's get started. Just to put it on your calendar, Tuesday, December 2nd, we have an upcoming webinar with Rebecca Aubrey. Ask Me a Question, Leveling Up Novices with Question Creation. And for those of you who are involved or interested in teacher preparation, we have Preparing Teacher Candidates for Professional Success, the World Languages Methods course on Tuesday, December 9th, 4 to 5 p.m. CTLE credits are always available, and all of our webinar sessions are recorded. So please keep yourselves muted. There will be one point at which we ask you to just think alone. The chat box will appear on our final slide, and we do have a few items in a Google folder. If you see that icon, you'll know the items are in that folder, and the slides associated with this webinar will be placed in that folder at the conclusion of the webinar. So we have several goals for today's session, starting with, I can identify 3 important principles to guide the teaching of grammar within standards-based unit planning. I can explain the relationship between proficiency, language function, and control of grammatical structures. I can identify where interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational lessons provide opportunities to focus on grammatical structures in meaningful contexts. And I can identify scaffolding strategies for teaching grammar in context for checkpoint A and checkpoint B. I heard that we don't teach grammar with revised New York State World Language Learning Standards. We've heard that statement multiple times, and that was our motivation for today's webinar. But what we say each and every time, you heard wrong. We absolutely still teach grammar, but we do so in context. And if you haven't yet done so, watch these 2 recorded webinars on grammar that we did back in 2022. The fact is that the role of grammar in New York State World Language instruction has not changed since 1986. You can see that purple Bible, Modern Languages for Communication. And one of my favorite quotes is on page 3, and it says, rather than teaching students vocabulary words or grammatical structures in isolation, Teachers are urged to help students regard and use the modern language as a tool that will enable them to accomplish a specific communicative purpose in a particular form and setting about a particular subject. The focus is always on what the students can do with the language and how well they can do it. And if we take a closer look, we're going to notice that communicative purpose is what we refer to as a language function. Particular form, that's the grammar. The grammar is in support of the language function. And what the students can do with the language and how well they can do it, that's proficiency. So in anticipation of today's session, we decided to do a little bit of informal research. And we reached out to some parents and we asked them, could you ask your child who's enrolled in a world language course, what are you learning in whatever the language, in this case, Spanish class? So we're going to share with you two responses. This is the response from student number 1. We are learning ser, to be words, adjectives, pronouns, verbs, how to write and speak in small sentences. So if we take a closer look at that student's response of what they're learning in Spanish class, what we will leave ourselves questioning is, what's the communicative purpose? So this student is learning lots of grammar, but we don't see the communicative purpose. Again, this is what the student had to say. But the reality is, some world language instruction has veered away from the 1986 guidance. So I want to take a moment to unpack that, why that has happened. So we're going to start with, repeat after me. Some of you may have been prepared like I was back in the day, where world language instruction was much about repetition, believing that language acquisition occurred through imitation, and teachers are known to reproduce the way they were taught. Another reason, if you taught an AP course or taught in a program that had an AP course, until 2014, that AP exam had a very grammatical focus. And the College Board encouraged all the AP teachers to create a vertical alignment of their curriculum. I was an AP teacher and I created a vertical grammatical alignment for my department. Or you may need to use a textbook, and textbooks often front the grammar, front the vocabulary, and then somewhere along the line get to communication. Well, textbooks weren't written for New York State. They're written to be used in any program that would potentially purchase them anywhere in the country. So they have a smorgasbord of content. Or you might be like me. My life is a constant battle between wanting to correct grammar and wanting to have friends. I love grammar, and so why wouldn't I want to teach it? But language functions are at the heart of the New York State learning standards for world languages. And when we can see that when we look across all 5 of our learning standards, every one of them has from 1 to 5 language functions embedded right in the wording of the standard. So let's go find out what another parent got in response to their inquiry. Again, the parent asked, what are you learning in Spanish class? And this student replied, we're learning to say our name, where we're from, our age and birthday, personal characteristics, and likes and don't likes. It's a very different kind of response, and one that clearly embeds language functions. Paul Sandrock said, we know that the grammar we're teaching has a purpose. but our students don't make that same connection. So this is a place when, if we do want to make that explicit to our students, we can use the can-do statements. Let's take a look at what that can look like. So the core can-do statement, you all know, is I can, followed by a language function in a meaningful context. If it's helpful to make that grammar structure explicit to our learners, it's the next thing that follows after the core can-do statement, the word using and then naming the grammar structure. And of course, we always want to identify the acceptable evidence that will show that our student can carry out the can-do statement using the word by and that product that the learners will create to enact the language function in context at the identified proficiency target. So, for example, a can-do statement that makes the grammar explicit might look like this. I can describe language function, my friends, my meaningful context, using the verb ser, there's the grammar, by captioning a group selfie, my acceptable evidence. ACTFL has a set of guiding principles for world language instruction, and one of them is called Teach Grammar as Concept in Context. So I want to share with you an excerpt from this particular guiding principle. And it says, in order to be most effective, learners should be expected to learn grammar implicitly through target language use and explicitly through the discovery of grammatical rules through use in meaningful examples. So, with that idea of implicit grammar instruction through target language use in mind, let's take another look at what that second learner had to say. He said, we're learning to say our name, where we're from, our age and birthday, personal characteristics, and likes and don't likes. What this child doesn't realize, but the teacher is very much aware of, is that this is that implicit grammar instruction through target language use. In Spanish, embedded in every one of those language functions in a context are reflexive verbs, subject-verb agreement, prepositions, word order, possession, adjective agreement, indirect object pronouns, and more. This is a checkpoint A learner. Those will get unpacked later on, but for right now, he's acquiring them through the language functions and that implicit grammar instruction. So, explicit grammar instruction through discovery of grammatical rules in meaningful examples. I want to share a couple quotes with you to help unpack this. The first quote, if you read the recent language educator from ACTFL, in this article says, research shows that humans are naturally good at noticing patterns in the language they're learning. We know that from brain research. A second quote, it is easier for learners to make form-meaning connections. Remember, form is the word we reference to refer to grammar. It's easier for learners to make form-meaning connections for linguistic features that appear often, carry important messages, and follow predictable patterns. So I'd like you all to just take a moment to think. This is just thinking, no chatting. What are the implications of this? What these two quotes have to say to us. What are the implications for our instruction? Perhaps you were thinking these ideas, that number one, when we identify resources for our learners to make meaning of, whether it's something that they read, they receive, they view, they listen to, it needs to carry an important message. That's where the meaning comes from. It also means that within that text that we choose, those linguistic features that we want to focus on, or the linguistic feature we want to focus on, needs to appear often. It needs to be salient. And that what we choose to focus on grammatically needs to follow a predictable pattern. 3 implications for our instruction and our instructional choices. But a really important caveat is that not all grammar is rule-based. Lowen says one other characteristic of grammar is that while much of it is rule-based, there are also some components that are item-based. What this means is that for many grammatical structures, there are rules that can be used to produce target-like language. However, sometimes there are no rules, and these items need to be memorized. This is the case when we think about grammar structures more like vocabulary. Some examples in Spanish, we can see irregular to command of hacer, irregular past participle of hacer, has and hecho. And some French examples, we have an irregular present tense vous form, which I'm not going to try to pronounce, and an irregular past participle, which I'm also not going to try to pronounce. Sorry, French teachers. But you know, these must just simply be memorized. So how does grammar relate to proficiency? Because that was part of our title. Meg Malone, who is the director of assessment at Actville, says students don't move automatically from understanding how a concept works, and don't forget, grammar is a concept, to functional ability, that ability to carry out a language function with support of that grammar. It takes time and repeated practice in a variety of contexts before students will internalize a concept and be able to produce it spontaneously. Over time, they will develop different degrees of control over the concept. And when we talk about degrees of control, we're talking about having learners simply have conceptual control at the start. Like, I know there's something I'm supposed to do with this. I have kind of an idea about it. Partial control, I can use it accurately some of the time, especially if I have some guided support. And full control, I got this. I can use this accurately the majority of the time. And one or more point about our instructional design, we always want to be thinking about that comfort and stretch. You've heard us talk about it before. Comfort is where our learners are. When we start with where our learners are relative to their proficiency, it increases their level of control. It builds their automaticity, builds their confidence, and it provides us an opportunity to withdraw scaffolds because our goal is for them to be able to perform without those scaffolds over time. But we must simultaneously be stretching them to build a foundation for proficiency growth. And we've begun with a conceptual control, and we want to build on that. And the more we're stretching our learners, the more scaffolds we have to build in. So as we think about grammar in context, where do we start? There are 3 foundational understandings. First, start with a language function. We always want that communicative purpose front and center. Next, know the proficiency target and the anticipated level of control. So where are our learners? What's their comfort? Where are we stretching them to? And what level of control, conceptual, partial, or full, are we anticipating? And then, what is the grammatical form that's going to help our learners express that language function in a meaningful context? We want to connect the form or the grammar to meaning. So you may wonder, when do I teach the grammar? Well, I want you to use this image as a means of understanding the answer to that question. We begin with meaning making. So meaning's always first. And that happens when we have our input standard, interpretive communication, which has the three language functions of understand, interpret, and analyze. And so once our learners have made meaning, it's after that meaning making that we engage our learners in explicit grammar instruction through the discovery of the grammatical rules that were embedded in that meaningful text. Once we've done that, we can move into the expression of meaning, but our learners will need the grammar, they'll need the form in order to be able to express that meaning. So before expressing meaning in the interpersonal and presentational tasks, we will be using the implicit grammar instruction through target language use. And we see our 4 interpersonal language functions: exchange information, express feelings, preferences, opinions, and our 5 presentational language functions: describe, inform, narrate, explain, and persuade. So I'm going to start by talking about having learners discover grammatical rules from input. My colleagues will take you through the output. So again, this is where we start with the meaning and discover the grammar. And when we do this, again, our first step is to engage our learners in making meaning of the input with the interpretive language functions using the pre, during, post interpretation framework. Once we've done that, and we're in that post-interpretation portion of the lesson, we want to engage our learners in noticing one salient or highly visible grammatical pattern in the input. And I cannot emphasize enough, we're talking about only one grammatical pattern, because it's after they have that one, we can build on it. And once learners have noticed the salient grammatical pattern, we can engage them in metacognitive tasks to identify the meaning that the grammar conveys and the rules that describe the pattern, its use, and formation. And finally, we want to scaffold the learner's application of the grammatical pattern in meaningful contexts. So in this box, you can see the names of 3 different input-based models of grammar instruction. I'm going to focus on the PACE model, which many of you may already be familiar with, but it will illustrate the points that we're talking about. Bill will be giving you many examples of structured input. Concept formation is really out of the scope of what we have time for today, but you might choose to look it up. Mike Travers has done some nice work around that you could take a look at. PACE, each letter of PACE stands for a portion of the lesson. P, presentation. This is where you're engaging your learners in interpretive communication, making meaning of the input in that pre, during, and post interpretation. The A is attention. This is where you're having your learners do that noticing of that one salient grammatical pattern in the input. It's part of the post-interpretation phase. C is co-construction. This is that metalinguistic phase. You are engaging the learners in dialogue to identify the meaning conveyed by the grammatical pattern and the rules that describe the pattern, its use, and formation. And finally, the E moves us out of interpretive communication and into presentational communication, where our learners are expressing their own meaning using that grammatical pattern, but in a scaffolded manner. So I'm going to be sharing with you 2 different PACE lessons. Why 2? Because I want to show you what PACE can look like at checkpoint A, and I want to show you what it can look like at checkpoint B, so you can think about the different grammatical choices and the different tasks that learners, the different kinds of interpretive tasks, as well as presentational tasks we might engage learners in. So this is Spanish 8th grade, and my unit theme would be Una vida buena, a good life. And the lesson focus, this PACE lesson focus, is about making good choices, a wonderful thing to engage 8th graders in. The interpretive language function is to identify topics and basic facts. And the presentational language function would be setting goals. And don't forget, even though setting goals isn't one of those 5 presentational language functions, those can be worded differently. So in this case, setting goals might simply be informing. The grammar in this case, which can be seen in the authentic resource, is más de and menos de. More of this and less of this. And we're only looking for conceptual control. This is checkpoint A. So take a moment to look at the authentic resource with me for a moment. It says keys for a healthier and happier childhood. And it comes from Mexico, a website, Hábitos, habits. And there are a list, and this is perfect for checkpoint A because visuals matter. And there's a list of what children should have less of and what they should have more of for that healthy, happy life. So in pre-interpretation, the first part of presentation, have learners imagine that they're babysitting an elementary age child soon. And have the learners work with a partner to create a list. What would be some appropriate activities for the child to do alone or to do with you while you're babysitting? And of course, you want to model a list creation with the I do, we do, you do strategy. And then after the pairs have put their list together, call on pairs to contribute one activity from their list. And every time an activity is added, let's have a show of hands if other pairs had that on the list as well. And I'll count how many hands are raised. And from that, I'm going to create a labeled frequency graph for each activity. So maybe reading has 5 hands, and maybe playing video games has 10 hands. And so we'll create a little graph. Moving from pre-interpretation to during and post-interpretation, I'll distribute the reading, Claves para una niñez más sana y feliz, and have my learners again work with a partner to circle any activities in the readings 2 columns that they had on their list. And they can use those images, noting that some of the words may be different. For example, they may have written leer, reading, but the infographic says cuentos, stories. And of course, I'll model the task. I'll elicit examples of those various circled activities from the partners and ask the learners why they think the author listed the activities in 2 columns. And even ask learners if any of their circled activities happen to be in that left-hand column, which is the do less of this. And moving us to that next proficiency level, a bit of a stretch, ask learners what they think the author's message is. Now we're moving into A, attention, noticing that one salient grammatical pattern in the input. So I'll display the reading on the screen, draw learners' attention to those headings of each column, highlighting menos de and más de, and ask learners to notice the words that the headings have in common. And one activity at a time, we're going to read más de or menos de heading followed by a listed activity. Now, why would I do that? Because they're actually only listed once, but it's implied that each one is used with a different one of the activities. So now I'm going to facilitate a dialogue with the learners to co-construct meaning and rules of the grammatical pattern. And you'll note I've said this in English because we know that co-constructing grammatical rules does need to take place in English at checkpoint A. So here are some of the questions in the order that I might ask them. What do you notice about the highlighted words? What is similar? What is different? What do you think is the purpose of these words in this reading? How do you think these words are used? What is a rule we can make for using these words? And let's try it out with our graph. So we also have a chance to practice it and see if our rules work. And so moving on to the extension, I have the extension in two parts because I have it more scaffolded. First, just to check learners' understanding of the grammatical application before we move on. So my more scaffolded task will be this. I'm going to have the learners return to their babysitting activities list with their partner, and then have them create a T-chart and label its two columns, menos de and más de, just like the infographic, and have learners decide which of the activities maybe they should do less of and which to do more of while babysitting. Again, for that happier, healthier child, and write their activities in the corresponding columns. And then I can go around eliciting an example from each set of partners. By listening to those examples, I know if they've got the structure applied correctly, and then I can move on to the less scaffolded task to apply grammar in a related context.
Eso.
So
Professional
I
development.
will have the learners reflect on personal activities that they would like to do more and less of, and have the learners create.
Fue cuando estaba aquí ya. Pero está muy bueno.
If you are unmuted, please mute yourself. And I would have learners create a T-chart and label it metas personales. So this is about personal goals. And then have them label the columns menos de and más de. And think about which personal activities they want to write in each column. Which things, what goals am I setting for myself to do less of and things to do more of? And then learners can compare their personal goals with a partner. So that was an example to see what this looks like at checkpoint A. Let's move on to see what it might look like at checkpoint B. Whoop, would you go back one sec? Thank you, Bill. So the context here is 9th grade, and my unit theme is no hay nada que hacer. There's nothing to do. We hear that a lot. And the lesson focus would be generating interest in a new school club. Interpretive language function, identify topic, main idea, and key details. Presentational language function, giving reasons. The grammar here is para with the infinitive in order to. And again, we're looking at conceptual control. And the authentic resource is por qué leer, why read. and we see 6 different reasons that the author gives for why people should read, every one of them using sirve para with the infinitive. Pre-interpretation. I'm going to ask the learners to brainstorm text genres that people read. Then I'll distribute a survey about reading to the learners and have them add genres that they read that may not be listed in those blanks. And then for each one of the genres, identify the frequency with which they read. Then I'll have them engage in interviews with partners about the genres they read, the frequency with which they read each of the genres, and why. And we'll debrief the interviews, documenting those reasons on the whiteboard. In the during and post interpretation, I'll distribute the reading, por qué leer, have the learners skim it, identifying which reasons that were given match the ones that are in the reading. And let's check these off on the whiteboard. And then circle the reasons that they relate to personally and jot down a talking point, like how that relates to them. And then they can exchange those experiences with a partner. And then we'll hear some of those examples. Moving on to attention, I'll display the sentences from the reading on the screen and notice how I've bolded para with the infinitive. And I'm going to draw my learners' attention to the bolded words and ask them to notice what the bolded words have in common. When we move to the co-construction, which I'm still doing in English, I wouldn't be likely to do it in the target language till checkpoint C. I will ask them questions such as, what do you notice about the bolded words? What is the pattern? What do you think the purpose of these words is in the reading? What's a rule we can make for using these words? And let's try it out. And as we move into the more scaffolded section of the extension phase, I'll have learners write one more reason to read using leer sirve para with the infinitive. And I'm going to give them this template on which they can create a bookmark. They'll write their reason and they'll draw a simple drawing. And of course, I'm going to make copies of those on cardstock and we'll distribute them to the class. Now that we know that our learners can apply the grammatical form well, let's move to less scaffolded, where I ask my learners to imagine the reasons given for reading or rationale for starting a school book club, and have them work in small groups to identify a club they would like to propose. They need to start by identifying a key verb that would be associated with their proposed club, such as jugar videojuegos, play video games, and then using that verb, put together a flyer or a poster with a 5-point rationale for the club. Each point includes para with the infinitive, such as jugar videojuegos sirve para unir amigos. Playing video games is good for bringing friends together. And then have the groups present their poster or flyer to the class. So you've heard a lot about input. Let's shift over to output with Bill Heller.
Thank you, Joanne. Let me see if I can get back in my slides here. There we go. All right. So when we do focus on grammatical structures and output tasks, in interpersonal and presentational tasks, we focus on learner output. Students use the grammar to express their own meaning. So in pre-task activities, we can do it now where we did it at the post-task level in the interpretive. We can do it up front as a scaffold for noticing and using the grammar patterns needed to accomplish the communicative task that we're going to propose. This scaffolding can include the co-creation of supports, like brainstorming things that we'll need to do, or creating graphic organizers. We can, the scaffolds can include learning how to use supports like chat mats or sentence builders, or the scaffolding can include additional communicative input or output tasks. I'll give you some examples of that. We can also, in addition to interpretive and presentational, we can do post tasks that provide a second opportunity to notice how the grammatical pattern conveys the meaning, and can provide opportunities to extend or stretch the learning. These can include reporting findings or results based on interpersonal interactions and conversations, for example, using a sentence frame, or engaging in self-evaluation using checklists or a rubric. It can include receiving feedback and negotiating meaning with classmates, for example, in a gallery walk where they have conversations, or in having comments on a Padlet where students comment on each other's output. Or finally, it can include other communicative input or output activities. So let's take a look at an example. Here's an example from Checkpoint A in French for grade 7. So this would be probably toward the middle or the end of the seventh grade year. The unit theme is famous places. The unit focus, mes endroits préférés, my preferred surroundings, my preferred places. Our interpersonal language function that we're focusing on is exchanging information. And we follow up with a presentational language function of sharing information. Our grammar focus is the present tense singular of the verb aller, to go. And also they're going to see at a conceptual level, to just see it and use it, pour plus l'infinitif, in order to plus the infinitive. And our goal is strictly conceptual, especially for the in order to for the giving reasons, and partial for that the je form of aller. They should be able to partially have control of that once we're done. So let's see what this looks like. So our first scaffolding strategy, again, these are pre-task strategies of what we're getting to, is to use a structured input activity from Lee and Van Patten. We have our students complete a Likert-style survey about how often they go to various places, and each prompt is processed as a formulaic chunk. So there's no need to introduce every form of a verb at once. We're just using the je form, the first singular of the verb aller. And we notice how embedded in this is the use of the to plus the, whether a la, o, or l apostrophe, we have that embedded in there as a functional chunk. We don't make a deal out of it. We don't have to teach it directly. It's just there, and they're going to use it correctly because it's given correctly. So after we complete this survey, we have short conversations with partners using an inside-outside circle strategy. We'll get them in 2 circles, and they'll talk. They'll ask the question that was on the top of it. How often do you go? How often do you go there? And then we supply a list of reactions to make the conversation more natural and to keep them in the target language. Really? Me too. Me neither. Not me. That's funny. Of course, obviously, or cool. And then again, we can follow up by having the students report out to where their classmates go and how often. And we can supply a sentence frame using the third singular form as a model and a scaffold. Then a second strategy we can do, again, trying to build up to having a spontaneous conversation about where you go and why you go there, is to have the students take part in a group mixer, find someone who activity, where they have short conversations about places. So we give them this little bingo board grid. Students have short conversations to find out where their classmates go. To scaffold this task, we include a sample conversation. So that's included right there. You see it below. And then the students refer to the chart from strategy 1 to be able to answer the question. So Where do you do you go to the restaurant? No, I don't ever go there. I never go there. So that they have information from that first task, that chart that they did. Or do you go to the pool? Yeah, I go to the pool often. Oh, sign here, please. Thank you. And so they sign there and they go and collect other signatures. So they get signatures from their classmates to find someone who does these various things. Then a third strategy we do is now we get into the reasons. And this is what's called a referential structured input activity where there's just one single answer that they would have. And I'd match the where they go. Why do you go to the movies? I go to the movies to see a film. That would be choice G on the matching. So that they would match up why they would go to a certain place with its reason using that structure in order to plus infinitive. Then we'd use a sentence frame. So now they have these three tasks that they've done. They have all of that as scaffolds. They can draw on all of those activities. Now I'm going to give them a sentence frame. I go to a certain place, how often, in order to their goal. And so they develop 6 sentences, 3 logical, 3 illogical, using phrases from the 3 structured input activities. They refer to their charts from the previous activities. And then they take turns reading their sentences to a partner, and the partner decides whether their sentence is logical or illogical. For example, je vais au cinéma parfois pour voir un film. I go to the cinema often to see a film. Well, that's logique, that's logical. Je vais à la bibliothèque toujours pour nager. I go to the library often to swim. That's illogique, not logical at all. So finally, now I've done the scaffolding. Now we're ready to do a conversational task. So I'm going to distribute cards with the names of familiar places, one to each student. And then I'm going to have the students have conversations with 5 different classmates, finding out where they're going and why. And I'm going to give them a scaffold so that they have an idea of what to say using this by projecting these conversational cues. And the cues will be given in English to guide them on what they should be doing. So, for example, greet your partner and ask them how they are. Return the greeting. Ask your partner where is your partner is going. Tell where you are going. React to what your partner says and ask why. Tell why and ask where your partner is going. Tell where you are going. React to what your partner says and ask why. Tell why. Say goodbye. Say goodbye. So that's your conversation frame, and it might look like this. The conversation you give two kids. Partner 1 got the gym. Partner 2 got the library, and they might have a conversation that would look like this. Again, they would say the conversation. I've written it out for you. What they would say to each other. Hello. How are you? Hi, Marie. I'm doing really great. Where are you going? I'm going to the gym. Why? Oh, really? Why? I'm going to exercise. And you? Where are you going? I'm going to the library. Oh, that's too bad. Why? I'm going to study because for an exam. Oh, well, see you later. Bye. So that would be their conversation. And then you could role play the conversations and then report out what they learned in step 3. So after the conversations are all done, report where your classmates went and what they did there. Provide the sentence frame that allows the students to use the third person singular. My classmate goes where, how often, in order to, and so that you could have them report out and use the information that they gathered to do that. I'm going to call an audible here. I'm going to skip ahead so that we can get to Lori's section on presentational. So forgive me, I'm just going to rapidly skim through these slides. You will have them on the PDF so that you can go and see this checkpoint B example. And in addition, I've put some of the structured input activities from both of these interpersonal activities in the handouts folder. So with that, I'll turn over to Lori.
So many incredible ideas. Thank you so much, Bill. So I'm going to take you through a checkpoint A presentational communication task. This would be for Spanish, let's say 7th grade. And the unit theme is Soy una mezcla. I'm a mix. Describing your identity is the lesson focus, and for our presentational language functions, students will be describing themselves and informing classmates about things that are important to them. The grammar is present tense verbs for checkpoint A and the structure más que, more than. We're going for conceptual and possibly partial control of these structures. So have a look at this incredible image or meme. It reads, I am a mix of everything that I think, I read, I feel, I speak, I travel, I write, and I caress, I touch. Wonderful, beautiful, poetic, and also very, very simple language for our kids who are going to be describing themselves. So let's see what we can do with this wonderful, authentic resource. So first we'll do a scaffolding strategy. And of course, this is interpretive. We start with interpretive to build towards the presentational task to come. We're going to provide some input on these targeted structures. I first want to make sure students understand what this image reads. And so we're going to do a simple matching. I have images to stay away from glossing from the target language to English. So we have some images and the simple language that comes from the resource, and students are just going to match. So they're going to just go from here to there and very simple matching task. Now I'm going to take it to a second scaffolding strategy because remember, I'm moving towards presentational, so I want students to be able to produce something similar to this image on their own. So I want to generate some language first so that they have some words to work with. So we're going to brainstorm a list of verbs with the class, and these are actual verbs that I'm working on right now with my novice students, and so they will come up. Kids will say things like, I eat, I listen, I play, I watch, I dream, I touch, or I play in the case of tocar. So now we have some words to work with. But I still want to scaffold this for students. Remember, we're going for conceptual, possibly partial control of these structures. So I'm going to provide a sentence starter for them. And the sentence starter comes directly from that authentic resource. So, soy una mezcla. I am a mix de lo que. And we've got spaces for, let's say, 5 descriptors. Doesn't have to be, but that sounds like a good number. So students might add their own descriptors. So I am a mix of things that I eat, things that I drink, this one could be mine, things that I play, I read, and I study. So here's our sentence starter. This is the presentational writing task that we're asking students to complete. So again, this is a presentational communication task. The overarching task is asking students to describe their personalities and inform their classmates about what is important to them. Step 1 is that presentational writing. Students describe themselves in a mini poster that shows what makes up their mezcla, using those first-person singular verbs that they've just generated. Might look something like this. I am a mix of everything I play, watch, listen to, read, and speak. Or another variant, I'm a mix of things I eat, prepare, drink, love, live, and sing. So again, students creating something, their presentational task will involve those grammar structures that we've just pulled from the authentic resource. Taking it a step further, we can bring in a second authentic resource to give a little bit of texture to their self-description. And this one is really lovely. Here's some more input for them. So we're going to have this lovely authentic resource says, constancy is more important than perfection, right? So now I want to make sure they understand that juxtaposition, that idea of más que. And I'm going to ask them to read this text here and have them identify things that are more important to them. So it's really an either or task, and they're going to choose. So is it time or money? Let's hope they choose time. Friends or family? I vote family. Calm or drama? Let's try for calm. And so on and so forth. So they're going to make those choices for themselves, and that's just bringing those lexical items up for a moment, but it's really about that structure, más que. And now we're going to knit all of this together. We've got those interpretive tasks. You might include some interpersonal speaking where they talk about the things that they've written about. But the final presentational speaking task will be for students to inform their classmates about what makes up their mezcla and about the things that are most important to them. So we're taking those two ideas, putting them into one, and this is a presentational speaking task. I love things like Padlet, but you could do this in front of the classroom. I like having Padlet because students can then comment on each other's presentations. So it's a really, really quick novice checkpoint A example. I wanted to finish today by sharing, I think Bill, Joanne, and I have all been talking about things we may be used to do or the way we were taught to teach grammar. And certainly that has been the way my journey has gone. So I'm going to share with you a few things that really show where I've begun and things I'm doing now. So for example, when I first started teaching, I organized my curriculum by a sequence of grammar topics. That was then. Now, curriculum is organized by themes that purposefully sequence and spiral language functions and lexical items. So here's an example of a wonderful authentic resource about color. Color can be no need for a unit on the colors. Color can come through art, it can come through, in this case, psychology. So using this authentic resource, we've got some really good text. I might pull out the idea of color related to your own personality. So for example, a language function might be describe your personality as part of a color-related class poster. And maybe it's yellow or maybe it's brown, but they can use the structures in this authentic resource. And of course, color and these structures can spiral throughout the curriculum. Another then, or things I used to do, I would focus my lessons on linguistic structures. So maybe a unit on the negatives or a lesson or an avoir idioms or por versus para. That's always a big one. And now I've moved away from that and I focus lessons on those language functions that we've been sharing with you throughout today's webinar. So for example, these wonderful authentic resources about the benefits of smiling, the benefits of meditation. And we might focus on the language function of exchanging information for an interpersonal speaking task where students exchange information about the benefits of different tips for improving your mental health. I used to design lessons that focus on mechanical manipulation of forms. As Joanne said, we all got into this because we love grammar and that's what felt right at the time. And I've since moved on to design contextualized activities and tasks that connect form and meaning. As is the case with this wonderful series of resources, this is about making those New Year resolutions, right? And in Spain, the tradition of the 12 grapes, where you have to eat 12 grapes before the stroke of midnight. And so these are the first image is all of the different resolutions that you might make. And the second authentic resource talks about how to accomplish those resolutions. So by knitting them together, we have a task that combines the form and meaning. The meaning making would be, here's something I want to do. For example, I would like to exercise more. So para hacer ejercicio, crea un plan de acción. So we have taking these two ideas, putting them together, and you have a good grammatical structure that's connecting these forms, most importantly, to meaning. I used to start with the rules. We love rules. Now I'm looking at meaning. We really want to focus on meaning, have students find patterns, as we said earlier. We are all really pattern-making animals. And so we want to consolidate these patterns using graphic organizers or anchor charts. This infographic is 110 steps. Can you imagine the repetition? For a more ecological life. And so we have all of these verbs repeated over and over again. And so I might pull out the essential ones and create this anchor chart or a word wall with all of the verbs that come from this text. So students finding the patterns that they pull from the authentic resource. I used to introduce those conjugation groups separately, maybe the regular verbs, then the stem changing verbs, then the dreaded irregular verbs. Now I really look at introducing different persons, different subject pronouns separately. There's no need to go through the entire verb paradigm, but look at the material you have in front of you. The verbs that are relevant to the task will be the most, as Joanne said, salient, the most important. This resource is for the question is, what animal are you according to the Mayan horoscope? Wonderful graphics, wonderful language in this particular resource. So there's two ways I could go. The title is a tu question, a you question. So what animal are you? I am a turtle. So you might go that route with it. But I would likely go the route of using the third person plural because the description of all of these animals comes in the third person plural. And so I might just focus on that particular person, right? Because that's what the resource is giving me. So what are they like? Well, turtles love to be alone and they love to dedicate themselves to family. So we're really focusing in those verbs that are relevant to the task that you've just designed. And last but not least, I used to do present, practice, and produce, right? And those were my 3 Ps. I've since moved on to begin with the input and move towards output. Or as Joanne mentioned earlier, begin with the implicit and move towards explicit. So for example, this resource is a lovely wish for things go well with you. So I hope that today, the best one, your coffee is really delicious. And it goes on to make all these wonderful wishes. So I might ask students to read through this. And again, they're going to look for that information implicitly, the grammatical structures. And now I'm going to ask them to make wishes, perhaps for their friends or their classmates. And that might look something like this.
Hello.
I hope that your day is beautiful. I hope that your birthday is fun. So again, moving
Okay,
towards
thank
that
you.
implicit towards, beginning with implicit and moving towards explicit. We made it. It's 5:02. Let's revisit today's goals and then we can take questions. So we hope that at the end of this webinar, you can say that you can identify 3 important principles to guide the teaching of grammar within standards-based unit planning, that you can explain the relationship between proficiency, language function, and control of grammatical structures, that you can identify where interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational lessons provide these opportunities to focus on grammatical structures in meaningful contexts. And finally, I can identify scaffolding strategies for teaching grammar in context for checkpoint A and checkpoint B. And with that, I want to thank you. We will open up the chat to your questions. And thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for those lovely warm wishes.
So while we're waiting for people to put questions into the chat, I want to formally thank our amazing dream team of Dr. Joanna O'Toole, Bill Heller, and Dr. Lori Langer de Ramirez for putting this together. I am going to stop the recording now.